Alright class, so today we're going to be looking at plot structure, and we're also going to take a look at the good old plot pyramid that we'll be using in class this year. Alright, so let's get started. At its most basic form, the plot structure consists of 6 attributes. We have exposition, we have rising action, we have conflict, we have climax, falling action, and resolution. So these are the 6 main components that we'll be using for our plot diagrams. Alright, so the best way to look at this is looking at a plot diagram or structure. I call it the plot triangle. So start by making a line, straight line right here. Go up, it's a weird angle, down, and another straight line. So it starts off with the exposition. Then we have rising action. We also have our conflict introduced during this point. The top point right here is the climax, which lets you know it's the most pivotal point of the story. Followed by this little end right here will be falling action. And then it ends with resolution on this line. Alright, so let's take a look at each one specifically. First we have exposition. When you see the word exposition, I want you to think of the word expose. This is the point where the author is going to give you all of the basic information. So expose basic information. During this time, the author will typically explain setting. So this is when they give you setting, introduction of the characters, and any background information that is important to the plot. Alright, let's move on then. So exposition, think expose. This is where all the basic info comes from. Alright, up next will be rising action. So this is the plot slowly moves forward. So in rising action, the author begins to discuss the conflict. They may not outright state what the problem is, but they will at least hint towards something is wrong, or that something needs to be overcome. They're also going to show, at least hint, what characters are going to be doing to solve the problem. Alright, so let's move on. Now we get into conflict. Typically conflict is mixed in with rising action, but for our purposes we're going to keep it its own separate thing. The conflict is the problem or issue the main character must overcome. And we'll go over an example of this very shortly. Alright, let's move on. We're going to move on a little bit faster. We have climax. This is that big top point of the triangle. So climax. This is the main problem is at its worst. So problem is at its worst. And then the character makes an important decision. this important decision will affect the entire ending of the story. So that's climax. Whoops. Should probably spell that properly. Alright, moving on. We have falling action. This is all the action that happens right after the climax. This is when the actual problem is solved. Problem is solved. So that's the simplest explanation for falling action. The character or main character or characters begin to fix the issue at hand. Then we have our final thing is called resolution. But I have a special word for you to use from here on out. It's called denouement. And I'm spelling it right here for you. It means the same thing as resolution. So these are two same things. And this is where the conflict comes to an end. So it's the ending, obviously. Where characters reflect on what has happened. Alright. So, one more time. What we've discussed today is we did a basic plot structure. So once again, starts with exposition, expose, that's where all the basic information comes from. Your rising action, where the problem begins to present itself. Players move around. Your conflict, where you learn the major problem. Your climax, where the main characters make an important decision that affects the rest of the story, that makes their decision on how to fix the problem. Falling action is when they're solving it. And denouement is when they actually resolve it. Everything is solved and then they reflect on it. Alright, so real quick I'm going to show you a picture of our plot diagram. So this right here is our plot diagram. And this is what we'll be using for our story. So for the first one, contents of Dead Man's Pocket, we'll be putting it up here. Typically, they give you 9 slots right here to mention the rising action, but there's not always that much here, so don't worry about that. The exposition is where they give you all the main information, who the protagonist, antagonist, setting, internal and external conflict, and we will go over that shortly. And then by the resolution, you should understand the author's theme and whether they have any type of figurative language in there. So we'll be dealing with that shortly. Alright, so when you come into class tomorrow, we are going to start the story and we're going to start this plot diagram. Alright, see you then.